Section 10 of Married Love. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Married Love by Mary Stopes. Section 10, Chapter 8. Abstinence. How intoxicating indeed, how penetrating, like a most precious wine, is that love which is the sexual transformed by the magic of the will into the emotional and spiritual. And what a loss on the merest grounds of prudence and the economy of pleasure is its unbridled waste along physical channels. So nothing is so much to be dreaded between lovers as just this, the vulgarization of love, and this is the rock upon which marriage so often splits. Edward Carpenter. And because marriage so often splits upon this rock, or because men and women have in all ages yearned for spiritual beauty, there have been those who shut themselves off from all the sweet usages of the body. In the struggle of man to gain command over his body, and in the slow and often backsliding evolution of the higher love, there is no doubt that humanity owes much to the ascetic. But this debt is in the past. We are now gaining control of the lower forces, we are winning knowledge of the complex meanings and the spiritual transformations of our physical reactions, and in the future the highest social unit will be recognized to be the pair fused in love so that all human potentialities are theirs, as well as the higher potentialities which only perfect love can originate. Yet, as we live today, with still so many remnants of the older standards within and upon us, we must endeavor to understand the ascetic. He, less often she, is by no means seldom one of the products of marriage. It not infrequently happens that after a love marriage and some years of what is considered happiness, the man or woman may withdraw from the sex life, often looking down upon it, and considering that they have reached a higher plane by so doing. But such people seldom ask themselves if, while they lived it, they reached the highest possible level of the sex life. One of the most famous instances of the married ascetic is Tolstoy, whose later opinion was that the highest human being completely inhibits his sex desires and lives a celibate life. Ascetics, however, seldom have much knowledge of human physiology, and it seems to me that, with all their fine and religious fervor, they often lack the mysticism necessary for the full realization of the meaning and potentialities of the new creation resulting from man's and woman's highest union. Doubtless, if for an hour we were to take the place of the individual chemical atoms of oxygen or of hydrogen, we could have no inkling of the physical properties of the water drop they together form. Christianity, like most religions, had a strong wave of asceticism early in its history. While there was, as there still is, a harsh asceticism which is hostile to the other sex, it is of much interest to see that there was also a romantic asceticism which, while revolting from the sensuality of the pagan contemporaries, did not entirely prohibit the charms and pleasures of mutual companionship. Thus, in a mutilated form, it seems these early Christian ascetics gained some of the immaterial benefits of marriage. Ellis, Volume 6, Sex and Society, 1913, gives an interesting account of these ascetic love unions. Our fathers, Chrysostom begins, against those who keep virgins in their houses, only knew two forms of sexual intimacy, marriage and fornication. Now a third form has appeared. Men introduce young girls into their houses and keep them there permanently, respecting their virginity. What, Chrysostom asks, is the reason? It seems to me that life in common with a woman is sweet even outside conjugal union and fleshly commerce. That is my feeling, and perhaps it is not my feeling alone. It may also be that of these men. They would not hold their honor so cheap, nor give rise to such scandals, if this pleasure were not violent and tyrannical. That there should really be a pleasure in this which produces a love more ardent than conjugal union may surprise you at first. But when I give you the proofs, you will agree that it is so. The absence of restraint to desire in marriage, he continues, often leads to speedy disgust, and even apart from this, sexual intercourse, pregnancy, delivery, lactation, The bringing up of children, and all the pains and anxieties that accompany these things, soon destroy youth and dull the point of pleasure. The virgin is free from these burdens. She retains her vigor and her youthfulness, and even at the age of 40 may rival the young nubile girl. A double ardor thus burns in the heart of him who lives with her, and the gratification of desire never extinguishes the bright flame which ever continues to increase in strength. Chrysostom describes minutely all the little cares and attentions which the modern girls of his time required, and which these men delighted to expend on their virginal sweethearts, whether in public or in private. He cannot help thinking, however, that the man who lavishes kisses and caresses on a woman whose virginity he retains is putting himself somewhat in the position of Tantalus. But this new refinement of tender chastity, which came as a delicious discovery to the early Christians who resolutely thrust away the licentiousness of the pagan world, was deeply rooted, as we discover from the frequency with which the grave fathers of the Church, apprehensive of scandal, felt called upon to reprove it, though their condemnation is sometimes not without a trace of secret sympathy. Thus Jerome, in his letter to Eustochium, refers to those couples who share the same room, often even the same bed, and call us suspicious if we draw any conclusions, while Cyprian (Epistola 86) is unable to approve of those men he hears of, one a deacon, who live in familiar intercourse with virgins, even sleeping in the same bed with them, for, he declares, the feminine sex is weak and youth is wanton. The harsh ascetic, however, is the one the word ascetic most generally conjures up. Even if he accomplishes miracles of self-restraint and subdues desire, he is often weakened rather than strengthened by his determination to flout nature. Save only in the truly great, there is a warping and narrowing which results from coercing beyond the limits of reason the desires which were implanted in Adam and Eve when they were told to be fruitful and multiply. As Ellen Key says, Love and Marriage, those ascetics who recommend only self-control as a remedy for the mastery of sexual instinct, even when such control becomes merely obstructive to life, are like the physician who tried only to drive the fever out of his patient. It was nothing to him that the sick man died of the cure. But these one group, which includes most of the female ascetics, hates Cupid because he has never shown to them any favor. The other group, embracing the majority of male ascetics, curse him because he never leaves them in peace. Approaching the subject in a more modern and scientific attitude of impartial inquiry, the medical man can produce an imposing list of diseases more or less directly caused by abstinence, both in men and in women. These diseases range from neuralgia and nerves to, in women, fibroid growths. And it is well worthy of remark that these diseases may be present when the patient, as have many unmarried women, has no idea that the sex impulse exists unmastered. Thus the ascetic and the profligate, whether or not in legal marriage, have both to run the gauntlet of disease. There is, however, no disease I know of which is caused by the normal and mutually happy marriage relation, a relation which, certainly to most, has positive healing and vitalizing power. The profound truth which is perceived by the ascetics is that the creative energy of sex can be transformed into other activities. This truth should never be lost sight of in marriage, where, between the times of natural, happy, and also stimulating exercise of the sex functions, the periods of complete abstinence should be opportunities for transmuting the healthy sex power into work of every sort. End of section 10.
Or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ariel Lipshaw. Married Love by Marie Stopes. Section 11, Chapter 9, Children. I am for you and you are for me, not only for your own sake but for others' sakes. Embellishing you seemed greater heroes and bards, who refused to awake at the touch of any man but me. Walt Whitman. The mystic in his moment of enlightenment attains through the flux of his personality the realization of oneness with the divine forces of the universe. To ordinary men and women, however, this mystical ecstasy is unknown, and the ordinary human consciousness is far more aware of its separateness than of its oneness with the vital forces of creation. Yet the glow of half-swooning rapture, in which the mystic's whole being melts and floats in the light of the divine force, is paralleled in the rapture of lovers. When two who are mated in every respect burn with the fire of the innumerable forces within them, which set their bodies longing towards each other with the desire to interpenetrate and to encompass one another, the fusion of joy and rapture is not purely physical. The half-swooning sense of flux which overtakes the spirit in that eternal moment at the apex of rapture sweeps into its flaming tides the whole essence of the man and woman, and, as it were, the heat of the contact vaporizes their consciousness so that it fills the whole of cosmic space. For the moment they are identified with the divine thoughts, the waves of eternal force, which to the mystic often appear in terms of golden light. From their mutual penetration into the realms of supreme joy, the two lovers bring back with them a spark of that light which we call life, and unto them a child is born. This is the supreme purpose of nature in all her enticing weft of complex factors luring the two lovers into each other's arms. Only by the fusion of two can the new human life come into being, and only by creating a new life in this way can we hand on the torch which lights our consciousness in the sphere of matter. This mystical and wonderful fact has never yet found the poet to sing its full glory, but in the hearts of all who have known true love lies the realization of the sacredness that is theirs when they are in the very act of creation. Were our bodies specifically organized for this supreme purpose, two human beings would only pass through the sacred fire of mutual fusion in order to create a new life. But, however far our spirits have evolved, our bodies are composed of matter which bears the imprint of the many past phases through which we have reached our present position. And because in the world of the lower animals there is an immense wastage of all the young lives created, and it is necessary that myriads should be conceived in order that a small number should reach maturity, so in our bodies, specialized though they are in comparison with the lower animals, both sexes still produce a far larger number of germs awaiting fertilization than can be actually fructified and imbued with individual life. So profoundly has the course of our history been stamped upon us that each germ, unaware of its own futility if it reaches maturity at an unpropitious moment, is just as insistent in its development as the favored one which follows out the full natural course of its career and gives rise to a new individual. It is utterly impossible, organized as our bodies are at present, for us to obey the dictates of theologians and refrain from the destruction of potential life. The germ cells of the woman, though immeasurably less numerous than the male germ cells, the sperm, yet develop uselessly over and over again in every celibate as well as in every married woman, while myriads of sperm cells are destroyed, even in the process of the act which does ensure fertilization of the woman by the single favored sperm. If the theologians really mean what they say, and demand the voluntary effort of complete celibacy from all men, save for the purpose of procreation, this will not achieve their end of preventing the destruction of all potential life, and the monthly loss of unfertilized egg cell by women is beyond all the efforts of the will to curb. Nature, not man, arranged the destruction of potential life against which ascetic bishops rage. If, then, throughout the greater part of their lives the germinal cells of both sexes inevitably disintegrate without creating an embryo, there can be nothing wrong in selecting the most favorable moment possible for the conception of the first of these germinal cells to be endowed with the supreme privilege of creating a new life. What generally happens in marriage where this is not thought of is that one of the very earliest unions results in the fertilization of the wife, so that the young pair have a baby 9 months or a little more after marriage. Whereas, were they wise, and did they realize the full significance of what they were doing, they would allow at least 6 months or a year to elapse before beginning the supreme task of their lives, the burden of which falls mainly upon the woman. For many reasons it is more ideal to have the children spontaneously and early, but if economic conditions are hard, as they so often are in civilized life, it may be better to marry and defer the children rather than not to marry. See my Wise Parenthood. If the pair married very young and before they could afford to support children, they might wait several years with advantage. An exceptional case is one of the happiest marriages I know. The pair married while they were young students in the university, and 14 years later they had their first child, a splendidly healthy boy. Though such a long interval is certainly not to be universally recommended, as it is said that it may result in sterility, in this instance it was triumphantly better for the two to have lived normally satisfied happy lives than to have waited for 14 years and risked the man's fall. There are many reasons, both for their own and for the child's sake, why the potential parent should take the wise precaution of delay, unless, owing to special circumstances, they cannot expect to live together uninterruptedly. The child, conceived in rapture and hope, should be given every material chance which the wisdom and love of the parents can devise. And the first and most vital condition of its health is that the mother should be well and happy and free from anxiety while she bears it. The tremendous and far-reaching effects of marriage on the woman's whole organism make her less fitted to bear a child at the very commencement of marriage than later on, when the system will have adjusted itself to its new conditions. Not only for the sake of the child, however, should the first conception be a little delayed, but also to secure the lasting happiness of the married lovers. It is generally, though perhaps not always, wise thoroughly to establish their relation to each other before introducing the inevitable dislocation and readjustment necessitated by the wife's pregnancy and the birth of a child. In this book I am not speaking so much of the universal sex relation as to those who find themselves today in the highly civilized, artificial communities of English-speaking people. And in our present society, there is little doubt that the early birth of a child demands much self-sacrifice and self-restraint from the man, one of the reflex vibrations of which is his undefinable sense of loss and separation from his bride. This has been confided to me by many men who have been generous enough to trust me with some of the secrets of their lives. Mr. C. is typical of many others of his class. He was quiet and refined, with a strong strain of romantic love, which was entirely centered in his bride. He was manly and sufficiently virile to feel the need of sex intercourse, but he was unaware, as are so many men, of the woman's corresponding need, and he did not give his wife any orgasm. She took no pleasure, therefore, in the physical act of union, which for her was so incomplete. Very shortly after marriage she conceived, and a child was born 10 months after the wedding day. For 2 years after the birth of the child her vitality was so lowered that the sex act was to her so repugnant that she refused her husband any union, and it was thus 3 years after their marriage before they met in anything like a normal way. By that time the long separation from sex life, and the strain on the man, coupled with daily familiarity at home, had dimmed, if not completely destroyed, his sense of romance. The natural stimulation each should exert on the other had faded, so that they never experienced the mutual glow of rapture in their sex union. Another pair suffered similarly. Mr. and Mrs. D. were prevented for several years by the wife's real and fancied ill health from having any intercourse. When, after that time, she recovered, and passionately desired the true marriage relation, the husband felt it to be impossible. To him it would have been, as he expressed it, like raping his sister. Once such a thought has grown into a man's mind, it is very difficult to recapture the first fine early rapture. And with the loss of that early rapture, the two lose, for the rest of their lives, the irradiating joy which is priceless not only for its beauty, but for the vitality with which its wings are laden. On the other hand, if by waiting some months, or even years if they are young, the mated pair have learnt to adjust themselves to each other, and have experienced the full possibilities of complete lovemaking, the disturbance which is caused by the birth of the child is in no sense a danger to their happiness, but its crown and completion. A man once said to me, "One can endure anything for the sake of a beloved wife." But the wife is only utterly beloved when she and her married lover have not only entered paradise together, but when she fully realizes, through insight gained by her own experiences, the true nature of that which she is depriving her husband so long as her bodily condition makes sex union with him impossible. Much has been written, and may be found in the innumerable books on the sex problems, as to whether a man and woman should or should not have relations while the wife is bearing an unborn child. In this matter, experience is very various, so that it is difficult or impossible to give definite advice without knowing the full circumstances of each case. When, however, we observe the admirable sanctity of the pregnant females of the woodland creatures, and when we consider the extraordinary ignorance and disregard of women's needs which mark so many of our modern customs, we cannot but think that the safe side of this debatable question must be in the complete continence of the woman for at least 6 months before the birth of the child. I have heard from a number of women, however, that they desire union urgently at this time, and from others that the thought of it is incredible. Tolstoy strongly condemned any sex contact while the wife was pregnant or nursing, and blames the husband who puts upon her the unbearable burden of being at one and the same time a mistress, an exhausted mother, and a sickly, irritable, hysterical individual. And the husband loves her as his mistress, ignores her as a mother, and hates her for the irritability and hysteria which he himself has produced and produces. His view is taken by many of our noblest men. While the wife feels that she cannot allow her husband to enter the portals of her body when it has become the sacred temple of a developing life, she should also consider the perpetual strain which nature imposes upon him, and the tender and loving wife will readily find some means of giving him that physical relief which his nature needs. The exquisite, unselfish tenderness which is aroused in a man by the sense of mental and spiritual harmony with a wife who sympathizes with, because she understands his needs, is one of the loveliest things in marriage. The wife who knows how to waken this tenderness in a man raises him out of the self-centered slough in which so many men wallow unhappily. With an ardent man, wholly devoted to his wife and long deprived of her, the time will come when it will be sufficient for him to be near her and caress her, for relief to take place without any physical connection. After the birth of the first child, the health of the mother and of the baby both demand that there should be no hurried beginning of a second. At least a year should pass before the second little life is allowed to begin its unfolding, so that a minimum of about 2 years should elapse before the second child is born. The importance of this, both for the mother and for the child, is generally adequately recognized by medical specialists, and some distinguished gynecologists advise as much as 3 or 5 years between the births of successive children. While in the whole human relation there is no slavery or torture so horrible as coerced, unwilling motherhood, there is no joy and pride greater than that of a woman who is bearing the developing child of a man she adores. It is a serious reflection on our poisoned civilization that a pregnant woman should feel shame to appear in the streets. Never will the race reach true health till it is cured of its prurient sickness, and the prospective mother can carry her sacred burden as a priestess in a triumphal procession. Of the innumerable problems which touch upon the qualities transmitted to the children by their parents, the study of which may be covered by the general term eugenics, I shall here say nothing, nor shall I deal with the problems of birth and child-rearing. Many writers have considered these subjects, and my purpose in this book is to present aspects of sex life which have been more or less neglected by others. While throughout I have omitted the consideration of abnormalities, there is one condition which verges on the abnormal, but yet touches the lives of some married people who are individually both normal and healthy, about which a few words need to be said. It not infrequently happens that two healthy, loving people, for no apparent reason, seem unable to have a child. The old-fashioned view was that the fault lay with the woman, and the reproach of being a barren woman is one which brought untold anguish to many hearts. It is now beginning to be recognized, however, that in a childless union the fault, if fault it be, is as often the man's as the woman's, particularly where the husband is a brain worker in the city. Though it is natural that there should not be the same joy for the pair in a child which had not arisen from their own supreme fusion, nevertheless, the man who is generous and broad-minded might find much joy in a child of his wife's, were the obtaining of this child not coupled with the yielding of her body to the embrace of another man, which is so generally and so naturally repugnant to a husband. The future possibilities of science here come in. Much interesting research has already been done on the growth of the young of various creatures without the ordinary fertilization of the mother egg cell. Then there are the experiments by the famous Dr. Hunter at the end of the 18th century, and more recent work. See, for instance, Heap in The Proceedings of the Royal Society, 1897, and Marshall's textbook of The Physiology of Reproduction, 1910. While in such an event as these discoveries adumbrate, the husband would have no bodily part in the heritage of the child, yet in the creation of its spirit he could play a profound part, the potentialities of which appear to be almost unrecognized by humanity. The idea that the soul and character of the child can be in any degree influenced by the mental status of the mother during the months of its development as an embryo within her body is apt to be greeted with pure skepticism, for it is difficult of proof and repugnant to the male intellect, now accustomed to explain life in terms of chemistry. Yet all the wisest mothers whom I know vary only in the degree of their belief in this power of the mother. All are agreed in believing that the spiritual and mental condition and environment of the mother does profoundly affect the character and the mental and spiritual powers of the child. An interesting fact which strengthens the woman's point of view is quoted, though not in this connection, by Marshall, who says, "It has been found that immunity from disease may be acquired by young animals being suckled by a female which had previously become immune, the antibody to the disease being absorbed in the ingested milk." This particular fact is explainable in terms of chemistry, but it seems to me more than rash for anyone in these days of hormones from ductless glands to deny the possibility of mental states in the mother generating chemical messengers which may impress permanent characters in the physiological reactions of the developing child. Ellis says, Volume 6, Sex and Society, 1913, "The mother is the child's supreme parent, and during the period from conception to birth, the hygiene of the future man can only be affected by influences which work through her." And Alfred Russel Wallace, the great naturalist, thought the transmission of mental influence neither impossible nor even very improbable. I am convinced that it takes place all the time, molding and influencing the hereditary factors. Hence, I suggest that the husband who is deprived of normal fatherhood may yet make the child of his wife's body partly his own, if his thoughts are with her intensely, supportingly, and joyously through the whole time of the unborn baby's growth, if he reads to her, plays beautiful music or takes her to hear it, and gives her the very best of his thoughts and aspirations, mystical though the conclusion may seem, he does attain an actual measure of fatherhood. The converse is even more difficult, where the wife is really barren and the husband capable of having children with another woman. Then the attainment of children by the man is impossible, without the collaboration of another woman in a manner not outwardly recognized by our laws and customs. Even if this is done, it is clear that to introduce the child of another woman into the home is demanding a much greater self-abnegation from the wife than is demanded from the husband in the situation we have just considered. Many people whose ideals are very noble are yet strangely incapable of adapting the material acts of life to the real fulfillment of their ideals. Thus, there is a section of our community which insists that there should be no restriction whatever of the number of children born to married people. They think any birth control immoral. They take their stand upon the statement that we have no right to destroy potential life. But if they would study a little human or animal physiology, they would find that not only every celibate, but also every married man incessantly and inevitably wastes myriads of germs, which had the potentiality of fusion with an ovum, and consequently could have produced a child had opportunity been given them. For the supposed sake of one or two of these myriad sperms which must naturally and inevitably die, they encourage the production of babies in rapid succession, which are weakened by their proximity, while they might have been sturdy and healthy had they been conceived further apart from each other. Such people, while awake to the claims of the unborn, nay, even of the unconceived, are blind to the claims of the one who should be dearest of all to the husband, and for whose health and happiness he is responsible. A man swayed by archaic dogma will allow, even coerce, his wife to bear and bring forth an infant annually. Save where the woman is exceptional, each child following so rapidly on its predecessor saps and divides the vital strength which is available for the making of the offspring. This generally lowers the vitality of each succeeding child, and surely, even if slowly, may murder the woman who bears them. Of course, the effects of this strain upon the woman vary greatly according to her original health and vitality, the conditions of her surroundings, and the intensity of the family's struggle for food. A half-starved mother trying to bring up children in the foul air of city slums loses, as a rule, far more of her family than a comfortable and well-fed woman in the country. Nevertheless, conditions are not everything. Under the best conditions, the chances of death of the later children of a large family, which comes rapidly, are far greater than for the earlier children. Dr. Plotz found that while the death rate of first-born infants is about 220 per thousand, the death rate of the seventh-born is about 330, and of the 12th-born is 597 per thousand. So that when nature has its way, and 12 children come to sap a woman's vitality, so little strength has she that nearly 60% of these later ones die. What a waste of vitality! What a hideous orgy of agony for the mothers to produce in anguish death-doomed, suffering infants. Forel, The Sexual Question, 1908, says, "It seems almost incredible that in some countries medical men who are not ashamed to throw young men into the arms of prostitution blush when mention is made of anti-conceptional methods. This false modesty, created by custom and prejudice, waxes indignant at innocent things while it encourages the greatest infamies." It is important to observe that Holland, the country which takes most care that children shall be well and voluntarily conceived, has increased its survival rate, and has thereby not diminished but increased its population, and has the lowest infant mortality in Europe, while in America, where the outrageous Comstock laws confuse wise scientific prevention with illegal abortion and label them both as obscene, thus preventing people from obtaining decent hygienic knowledge, horrible and criminal abortion is more frequent than in any other country. It should be realized that all the proper medical methods of controlling pregnancy consist, not in destroying an already growing embryo, but in preventing the male sperm from reaching the unfertilized egg cell. This may be done either by shutting the sperms away from the opening of the womb, or by securing the death of all, instead of the natural death of all but one, of the 200 to 600 million sperms which enter the woman. Even when a child is allowed to grow in its mother, all these hundreds of millions of sperms are inevitably and naturally destroyed every time the man has an emission, and to add one more to these millions sacrificed by nature is surely no crime. To kill quickly the ejaculated sperms which would otherwise die and decompose naturally is a simple matter. Their minute and uncovered bodies are plasmolized in weak acid, such as vinegar and water, or by a solution of quinine, or by many other substances. To those who protest that we have no right to interfere with the course of nature, one must point out that the whole of civilization, everything which separates man from animals, is an interference with what such people commonly call nature. Nothing in the cosmos can be against nature, for it all forms part of the great processes of the universe. Actions differ, however, in their relative positions in the scale of things. Only those actions are worthy which lead the race onwards to a higher and fuller completion and the perfecting of its powers, which steer the race into the main current of that stream of life and vitality which courses through us and impels us forward. It is a sacred duty of all who dare to hand on the awe-inspiring gift of life, to hand it on in a vessel as fit and perfect as they can fashion, so that the body may be the strongest and most beautiful instrument possible in the service of the soul they summon to play its part in the mystery of the material being. End of section 11.
Section 12 of Married Love. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Elizabeth Klett. Married Love by Mari Stopes. Chapter 10. Society. Love is fed not by what it takes, but by what it gives, and that excellent dual love of man and wife must be fed also by the love they give to others. Edward Carpenter. Man, even the commonplace modern man, is romantic. He craves consciously or unconsciously for the freedom, the beauty, and the adventure which his forefathers found in their virgin forests. This craving, transmuted, changed out of recognition by civilized life and modern circumstances, is yet a factor not to be ignored in the relationship of the sexes. The bonds of matrimony, so often referred to with ribald laughter, touch and perhaps secretly gall even the most romantic and devoted husband. If to the sincere and friendly question, what is most difficult in married life for the man? One gets the sincere and rueful answer. That answer may be summed up in the words, perpetual propinquity. Of this the wife, particularly if she be really in love, is seldom fully aware. If her husband is her true lover, his tenderness and real devotion will give him the wit to conceal it. But though by concealment he may preserve the unruffled surface of their happiness, yet the longing to be roving is not completely extinguished. In the true lover, this unspoken, unconscious longing is perhaps less a desire to set out upon a fresh journey than a longing to experience again the exquisite joy of the return, to relive the magic charm of the approach to the spot in which the loved one is living her life, into the sacred separateness of which the lover breaks, and like the prince by his kiss, to stir her to fresh activity. As will be realized by those who have understood the preceding chapters, each coming together of man and wife, even if they have been mated for many years, should be a fresh adventure. Each winning should necessitate a fresh wooing. Yet what a man often finds so hard is to come to that wooing with full ardor and with that complete sense of romance, which alone can render it utterly delightful. If the woman he is to woo has been in a too uninterrupted and prosaic relation with him in the meantime. Most men, of course, have their businesses apart from their homes, but in the home lives of the great mass of middle-class people, the Victorian tradition still too largely preponderates, and the mated pair bore or deaden each other during the daily routine. To a very thoughtful couple whom I have known, so precious was the sense of romantic joy in one another that they endeavored to perpetuate it by living in different houses. Such a measure, however, is not likely to suit many people, particularly where there are children. Yet even without bodily separation, which must always entail expense, or any measure of freedom not at everyone's command, much can be done to retain that sense of spiritual freedom in which alone the full joy of loving union can be experienced. But even intellectual and spiritual freedom is often rendered impossible in present-day marriage. The beautiful desire for ideal unity, which is so strong in most hearts, is perhaps the original cause of one of the most deadening features in many marriages. In the endeavor to attain the ideal unity, one or other partner consciously or unconsciously imposes his or her will and opinions first upon the wife or husband, and then upon the children as they grow up. The typical self-opinionated male which this course develops, while a subject for laughter in plays and novels, a laughter which hastens his extermination, is yet by no means extinct. In his less exaggerated form, such a man may often be an idealist, but he is essentially an idealist of narrow vision. The peace, the unity for which he craves is superficially attained, but it takes acuter eyes than his to see that it is attained not by harmonious intermingling, but by superposition and destruction. I have known a romantic man of this type, apparently unaware that he was encroaching upon his wife's personality, who yet endeavored not only to choose her books and her friends for her, but prohibited her from buying the daily newspaper to which she had been accustomed for years before her marriage, saying that one newspaper was enough for them both, and blandly ignoring the fact that he took it with him out of the house before she had an opportunity of reading it. This man posed to himself more successfully than to others, not only as a romantic man, but as a model husband, and he reproached his wife for jeopardizing their perfect unity whenever she accepted an invitation in which he was not included. On the other hand, in homes where the avowed desire is for the modern freedom of intellectual life for both partners, there is very frequently a bickering, a sense of disharmony and unrest that dispels the peace and the air of restful security, which is an essential feature of a true home. It is one of the most difficult things in the world for two people of different opinions to retain their own opinions without each endeavoring to convert or coerce the other, and at the same time to feel that same tender trust in the judgment of the other that each would have felt had they agreed. It takes a generous and beautiful heart to see beauty and dignity in the attitude of a mate who is looking at the other side of a vital question. But the very fact that it does take a beautiful and generous heart to do this thing proves it well worth the doing. If the easier way is chosen and the two mutually conceal their views when they differ, or the stronger partner coerces the weaker into hiding those traits which give personality to an individual, the result is an impoverishing of both, and through that very fact, an impoverishment, a lowering of the love which both sought to serve. In marriage, each one dreams that he will find the understander, the one from whom he may set out into the world in search of treasures of knowledge and experience, and before whom the spoils may be exhibited without thought of rivalry, and with the certainty of glad appraisal. Treasures dear to our own hearts, but of no value to others, should here find appreciation, and here the tender, supersensitive germ of an idea may be watered and tended till its ripe beauty is ready to burst upon the world. As marriage is at present such tenderness and such stimulating appreciation is much more likely to come from the woman to the man and his work than from the man to the woman. For too long have men been accustomed to look upon woman's views, and in particular on her intellectual opinions, as being something demanding at the most a bland humoring beneath the kindest smiles. Even from the noblest man, the woman of sensitive personality today feels an undercurrent as of surprised congratulation when she has anything to say worth his serious attention outside that department of life supposed to belong to her sphere. Thus man robs his wedded self of a greatness which the dual unity might reach. But in marriage the mutual freedom and respect for opinion, vitally important though it be, is not sufficient for the full development of character. Life demands ever-widening interests. Owing partly to the differentiation of many types of individuals due to the specialization of civilization, which interests thoughtful individuals, and partly to the transmutation of his old vagrant instinct, man increasingly desires to touch and to realize the lives of his fellows. In the lives of others, our hearts and understanding may find perpetual adventures into the new and strange. Individual human beings, even the noblest and most complex yet evolved, have but a share of the innumerable faculties of the race. Hence, even in a supremely happy marriage, which touches, as does the mystic in his raptures, a realization of the whole universe, there cannot lie the whole of life's experience. Outside the actual lives of the pair, there must always be many types of thought and many potentialities, which can only be realized in the lives of other people. In the complete human relation, friends of all grades are needed, as well as a mate. Marriage, however, in its present form, is too often made to curtail the enjoyment of intimate friendships. The reason for this is partly the social etiquette, which, though discarded in the highest levels of society, still lingers in many circles, of inviting the husband and the wife together upon all social occasions. It is true that they are separated at the dinner table, but they are always within the possibility of earshot of each other, which very often deadens their potentialities for being entertaining. The mere fact of being overheard repeating something one may have already said elsewhere is sufficient to prevent some people from telling their best stories or from expressing their real views upon important matters. And still more serious barrier to joy, so primitive, so little evolved are we even yet, there is in most human beings a strong streak of sex jealousy. For either mate to be allowed to go out uncriticized into the world is to demand, if not more than the other is willing to give, at least a measure of trust which by its rarity appears nowadays as something conspicuously fine. Jealousy, which is one of the most frequent shadows cast by the blight of love, is very apt to sow a distrust in one which makes a normal life for the other partner impossible. It is hard to say in which sex the feeling is more strongly developed. It takes special forms under different circumstances, and if a nature is predisposed towards it, it is one of the most difficult characteristics to eradicate. Custom and generations of traditions seem to have imprinted on our race the false idea that marital fidelity is to be strengthened by coercive bonds. We are slowly growing out of this, and nowadays in most books giving advice to young wives, there is a section telling them that a man should be allowed to mend friends after marriage. But this is not enough. There should be complete and unquestioning trust on both sides. The man and the woman should each be free to go unchallenged by a thought on solitary excursions, or on visits, weekends, or walking tours, without the possibility of a breath of jealousy or suspicion springing up in the heart of one or the other. It is true that many natures are not yet ready for such trust, and might abuse such freedom. But the baser natures will always find a method of gratifying their desires, and are not likely to err a more entrusted freedom than they would have inevitably done through secret intrigues if held in jealous bondage. While on the other hand, it is only in the fresh, unsullied air of such freedom that the fullest and most perfect love can develop. In the marriage relation, it is supremely true that only by loosening the bonds can one bind two hearts indissolubly together. When they are sometimes physically apart, married lovers attain the closest spiritual union. For with sensitive spirits, and they are the only ones who know the highest pinnacles of love, periods of separation and solitude can be revivifying and recreative. So great is the human soul that some of its beauty is hidden by nearness. It needs distance between it and the beholder to be perceived in its true perspective. To the realization of the beauty and the enjoyment of solitude, woman in general tends to be less awake than man. This perhaps is due to the innumerable generations during which the claims of her children and of domestic life have robbed her of nature's healing gift. Although it is merely incidental to the drama, yet to me the most poignant thing in Synge's beautiful play Deirdre is that she could feel inevitable tragedy when the first thought of something apart from herself crosses her lover's mind. Deirdre and her lover had been together for 7 years in an unbroken and idyllic intimacy, and she feels that all is finished and that her doom, the knell of their joy, had struck, when for the first time she perceived in him a half-formed thought of an occupation apart from her. This ancient weakness of her sex must be conquered, and is being conquered by the modern woman. While modern marriage is tending to give ever more and more freedom to each of the partners, there is at the same time a unity of work and interest growing up which brings them together on a higher plane than the purely domestic one which was so confining to the women and so dull to the men. Every year one sees a widening of the independence and the range of the pursuits of women, but still far too often marriage puts an end to women's intellectual life. Marriage can never reach its full stature until women possess as much intellectual freedom and freedom of opportunity within it as do their partners. That at present the majority of women neither desire freedom for creative work nor would know how to use it is only a sign that we are still living in the shadow of the coercive and dwarfing influences of the past. In an interesting article on woman's intellectual work, W. Thomas, 1907, Sex and Society, says, "The American woman, with the enjoyment of greater liberty, has made an approach toward the standards of professional scholarship, and some individuals stand at the very top in their university studies and examinations. The trouble with these cases is that they are either swept away and engulfed by the modern system of marriage, or find themselves excluded in some intangible way from association with men in the fullest sense, and no career open to their talents." He sees clearly that this is but a passing phase in the development of our society, and he advocates a wider scope for the play of married women's powers. The practice of an occupational activity of her own choosing, and a generous attitude towards this on the part of the man, would contribute to relieve the strain and make marriage more frequently successful. When woman naturally develops the powers latent within her, man will find at his side not only a mate, free and strong, but a desirable friend and an intellectual comrade. The desire for freedom, both for physical and mental exploration, and for experiences outside the sacred enclosure of the home, may at first sight appear to be conflicting and entirely incompatible with the ideal of closer and more perfect unity between the married pair. But this conflict is only apparent, though it is true that most writers have failed to realize this. Consequently, in some sections of the writing and teaching of these advanced schools, there are claims only for increased freedom, a freedom to wander at will, a freedom in which the wanderer does not return to his fixed center. On the other hand, there are those who realize principally the beauty of married unity, and concentrating on the demand for the unity and extremist stability on the part of the married pair, are very apt to ignore the enriching flow of a wide life's experiences. They try to dam up the fertilizing tide of life, and thus, though they are unconscious of what they are doing, they tend to reduce the richness and beauty of marriage. It is for the young people of the new generation to realize that the two currents of longing which spring up within them, the longing for a full life experience and the longing for a close union with a lifelong mate, are not incompatible, but are actually both essential parts of a more perfect and fuller beauty of the future that already seeks to find its expression in their lives. Ellen Key, Love and Marriage, seems to fear the widening of the married woman's life, and she writes as though the aspiration to do professional and intellectual work of a high order must dwarf and sterilize the mother in the married woman. She writes of a more northerly people, the Scandinavians, and it may be true of her countrywomen, I do not know, but it is not essentially and universally true. I am writing of the English of today, and though we also have among us that dwarfed and sterilized type of woman, she forms in our community a dwindling minority. The majority of our best women enter marriage and motherhood, or else long for a marriage more beautiful than the warped mockery of it that is offered them. As Mrs. Stetson says, Women and Economics, in the primal physical functions of maternity, the human female cannot show that her supposed specialization to these uses has improved her fulfillment of them, rather the opposite. The more freely the human mother mingles in the natural industries of a human creature, as in the case of the savage woman, the peasant woman, the working woman everywhere who is not overworked, the more rightly she fulfills these functions. The more absolutely the woman is segregated to sex functions only, cut off from all economic use and made wholly dependent on the sex relation as a means of a livelihood, the more pathological does her motherhood become. The overdevelopment of sex caused by her economic dependence on the male reacts unfavorably on her essential duties. She is too female for the perfect motherhood. The majority of our young women, I am convinced, have in them the potentiality of a full and perfected love. So, too, have the majority of our young men, for the best type of young man today is tired of polygamy. He has seen enough in his father's and friends' lives of the weariness of the sinister, secret polygamy that hides itself and rots the race under the protecting cloak of the supposed monogamy of our social system. But as things are at present in England, the young man who marries, however much he may be in love, is generally too ignorant, as has been indicated in the preceding chapters, to give his wife all her nature requires. Then, sooner or later, comes the sequence of disappointments which culminate in the longing for a fresh adventure. As one young husband said to me, "A decent man can't go on having unions with his wife when she obviously does not enjoy them, and so he is forced to go elsewhere. And they call us polygamists. We are not polygamists any longer, but marriage is a rotten failure," was his verdict. No, they are not polygamists, the finest young men of our present and the future. Most men today are not in their heart of hearts polygamists, in spite of all the outward signs to the contrary, in spite of the fact that so few of them have remained faithful to one woman. But they are ignorant of the sex laws and traditions, that sex knowledge which was the heritage of much less civilized tribes, and so they have trampled and crushed out the very thing for the growth of which their hearts are aching. Hence, secretly, for in a marriage that is at least superficially happy the man seldom does this openly, the man begins to crave for another type of society, and he goes elsewhere. Not, it is true, to find, or even in the hope of finding, what he would get from a perfect marriage, but often to satisfy in some measure that yearning for fresh experience, for romance, and for that sense of fusion with another in the romantic experience, which, even if it is only a delusion of the senses, is yet one of the most precious things life has to offer. It is hard, indeed in most cases it seems impossible, for a good woman to understand what it is that draws her husband from her. Restricted by habit and convention in the exercise of her faculties, she is unaware of the ever-narrowing range of her interest and her powers of conversation. The home life tends to become that of a fenced pond, instead of a great ocean with innumerable currents. From the restricted and fenced man's instinct is ever to escape. Man's opportunities for exploration in the cities are few, and the prostitute is one of the most obvious doors of escape into new experiences. Women feel a so righteous and instinctive horror of prostitution, and regarding it they experience an indignation so intense that they do not seek to understand the man's attitude. The prostitute, however, sometimes supplies an element which is not purely physical, and which is often lacking in the wife's relation with her husband, an element of charm and mutual gaiety in pleasure. If good women realized this, while they would judge and endeavor to eliminate prostitution no less strenuously, they might be in a better position to begin their efforts to free men from the hold that social disease has upon them. It is perhaps impossible to find the beginning of a vicious circle, but the first step out of it must be the realization that one is within it, and the realization of some, at any rate, of its component parts. Man, through prudery, through the custom of ignoring the woman's side of marriage and considering his own whim as marriage law, has largely lost the art of stirring a chaste partner to physical love. He therefore deprives her of a glamour, the loss of which he deplores, for he feels a lack not only of romance and beauty, but of something higher which is mystically given as the result of the complete union. He blames his wife's coldness instead of his own want of art. Then he seeks elsewhere for the things she could have given him had he known how to win them. And she, knowing that the shrine has been desecrated, is filled with righteous indignation, though generally as blind as he is to the true cause of what has occurred. Manifold and far-reaching, influencing the whole structure of society not only in this country, but in every country and at every time, have been the influences which have grown up from the root fallacy in the marriage relation. Then there is another cause for the dulling of a wife's bright charm, her inferior position in the eyes of the law. It is indeed a serious matter, as Jean Finot says, that under present conditions the mistress keeps certain liberties which are denied to married women. The past and its history have been studied by many, and we may leave it. What concerns the present generation of young married people is today and the future. The future is full of hope. Already one sees beginning to grow up a new relationship between the units composing society. In the noblest society, love will hold sway. The love of mates will always be the supremest life experience, but it will no longer be an experience exclusive and warped. The love of friends and children, of comrades and fellow workers, will but serve to develop every power of the two who are mates. By mingling the greatness of their individual stature, they can achieve together something that, had both or either been dwarfed and puny individuals, would have remained forever unattainable. The whole trend of the evolution of human society has been toward an increased coherence of all its parts, until at the present time it is already almost possible to say that the community has an actual life on a plane above that of all the individuals composing it, that the community, in fact, is a super-entity. It is through the community of human beings, and not in our individual lives, that we reach an ultimate permanence upon this globe. When our relation to the community is fully realized, it will be seen that the health, the happiness, and the consequent powers of every individual concern not only his own life, but also affect the whole community of which he is a member. The happiness of a perfect marriage, which enhances the vitality of the private life, renders one not only capable of adding to the stream of the life-blood of the community in children, but by marriage one is also rendered a fitter and more perfect instrument for one's own particular work, the results of which should be shared by society as a whole, and in the tempering and finishing of which society plays a part. Thus it is the concern of the whole community that marriage should be as perfect, and hence as joyous as possible, so that the powers which should be set free and created for the purpose of the whole community should not be frittered away in the useless longing and disappointment engendered by ignorance, narrow restrictions, and low ideals. In the world the happily mated pair should be like a great and beautiful light, a light not hid under a bushel, but one whose beams shine through the lives of all around them. End of section 12.
Section 13 of Married Love. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Elizabeth Klett. Married Love by Mari Stopes. Chapter 11. The Glorious Unfolding. Let knowledge grow from more to more, but more of reverence in us dwell. Tennyson. We are surrounded in this world by processes and transmutations so amazing that were they not taking place around us hourly, they would be scouted as impossible imaginings. A mind must be dull and essentially lacking in wonderment, which, without amazement, can learn for the first time that the air we breathe, apparently so uniform in its invisible unity, is in reality composed of two principal and several other gases. The two gases, however, are but mixed as wine may be with water, and each gas by itself is a colourless air, visually like that mixture of the two which we call the atmosphere. Much greater is the miracle of the composition of water. It is made of only two gases, one of them a component of the air we breathe, and the other similarly invisible and odourless, but far lighter. These two invisible gases, when linked in a proportion proper to their natures, fuse and are no longer ethereal and invisible, but precipitate in a new substance, water. The waves of the sea with their thundering power, the sparkling tides of the river buoying the ships, are but the transmuted resultants of the union of two invisible gases. And this, in its simplest terms, is a parable of the infinitely complex and amazing transmutations of married love. Ellis expresses the strange mystery of one of the physical sides of love when he says, "What has always baffled men in the contemplation of sexual love is the seeming inadequacy of its cause, the immense discrepancy between the necessarily circumscribed regions of mucous membrane which is the final goal of such love, and the sea of world-embracing emotions to which it seems the door, so that, as Remy de Gourmont has said, the mucous membranes, by an ineffable mystery, enclose in their obscure folds all the riches of the infinite. It is a mystery before which the thinker and the artist are alike overcome." To me, however, the recent discoveries of physiology seem to afford a key which may unlock a chamber of the mystery and admit us to one of the halls of the Palace of Truth. The hormones (see page 61) in each individual body pour from one organ and affect another, and thus influence the whole character of the individual's life processes. Man and woman affect the lives of each, and are essentially vital to each. As I see them, the man and the woman are each organs, parts of the other, and in the strictest scientific as well as in a mystical sense, they together are a single unit, an individual entity. There is a physiological as well as a spiritual truth in the words, "They twain shall be one flesh." In love it is not only that the yearning of the bonds of affinity to be satisfied is met by the linking with one another, but that out of this union there grows a new and unprecedented creation. In this I am not speaking of the bodily child which springs from the love of its parents, but of the superphysical entity created by the perfect union in love of man and woman. Together, united by the love bonds which hold them, they are a new and wondrous thing, surpassing and different from the arithmetical sum of them both when separate. So seldom has the perfection of this new creation been experienced, that we are still far short even of imagining its full potentialities, but that it must have mighty powers we dimly realize. Youths and maidens stirred by the attraction of love feel hauntingly and inarticulately that there is before them an immense and beautiful experience, feel as though in union with the beloved there will be added powers of every sort which have no measure in terms of the ordinary unmated life. These prophetic dreams, if they are not true of each individual life, are yet true of the race as a whole, for in the dreams of youth today is a foreshadowing of the reality. So accustomed have we recently accept one aspect of organic evolution that the tendency in youth to be a recapitulation of our race's history. The well-worn phrase, ontogeny repeats phylogeny, has helped to concentrate our attention on the fact that the young in their development, in ourselves as in the animals, go through many phases which resemble the stages through which the whole race must have passed in the course of its evolution. While this is true, there is another characteristic of youth. It is prophetic. The dreams of youth, which each young heart expects to see fulfilled in its own life, seem so often to fade unfulfilled. But that is because the wonderful powers of youth are not supplied with the necessary tool, knowledge. And so potentialities, which could have worked miracles, are allowed to atrophy and die. But as humanity orients itself more truly, more and more will the knowledge and experience of the whole race be placed at the disposal of all youth on its entry into life. Then that glorious upspringing of the racial ideal, which finds its expression in each unspoiled generation of youth, will at last meet with a store of knowledge sufficient for its needs, and will find ready as a tool to its hand the accumulated and sifted wisdom of the race. Then youth will be spared the blunders and the pain and the unconscious self-destruction that today leaves scarcely any one untouched. In my own life, comparatively short and therefore lacking in experience though it be, I have known both personally and vicariously so much anguish that might have been prevented by knowledge. This impels me not to wait till my experience and researches are complete, and my life and vital interest are fading, but to hand on at once those gleanings of wisdom I have already accumulated, which may help the race to understand itself. Hence I conclude this little book, for though incomplete, it contains some of the vital things youth should be told. In all life activities, house-building, hunting, or any other, where intellectual and oral tradition comes in, as it does with the human race, instinct tends to die out. Thus the human mother is far less able to manage her baby without instruction than is a cat her kittens, although the human mother at her best has, in comparison with the cat, an infinitude of duties toward and influences over her child. A similar truth holds in relation to marriage. The century-long following of various civilized customs has not only deprived our young people of most of the instinctive knowledge they might have possessed, but has given rise to innumerable false and polluting customs. Though many write on the art of managing children, Few have anything to say about the art of marriage, save those who have some dogma, often theological or subversive of natural law, to proclaim. Any fundamental truth regarding marriage is rendered immeasurably difficult to ascertain because of the immense ranges of variety in human beings, even of the same race, many of which result from the artificial conditions and the unnatural stimuli so prevalent in what we call civilization. To attempt anything like a serious study of marriage in all its varieties would be a monumental work. Those who have even partially undertaken it have tended to become entangled in a maze of abnormalities, so that the needs of the normal, healthy, romantic person have been overlooked. Each pair, therefore, has tended to repeat the blunders from which it might have been saved, and to stumble blindly in a maze of difficulties which are not the essential heritage of humanity, but are due to the unreasoning folly of our present customs. I have written this book for those who enter marriage normally and healthily, and with optimism and hope. If they learn its lessons, they may be saved from some of the pitfalls in which thousands have wrecked their happiness, but they may not think that they will thereby easily attain the perfection of marriage. There are myriad subtleties in the adjustment of any two individuals. Each pair must, using the tenderest and most delicate touches, sound and test each other, learning their way about the intricacies of each other's hearts. Sometimes, with all the knowledge and the best will in the world, two who have married find that they cannot fuse their lives. Of this tragedy I have not here anything to say, but ordinary unhappiness would be less frequent than it is were the tenderness of knowledge applied to the problem of mutual adjustment from the first day of marriage. All the deepest and highest forces within us impel us to evolve an ever nobler and tenderer form of lifelong monogamy as our social ideal. While the thoughtful and tender-hearted must seek, with ever greater understanding, to ease and comfort those who miss this joyful natural development, reformers in their zeal for side issues must not forget the main growth of the stock. The beautiful sense for love in the hearts of the young should be encouraged, and they should have access to the knowledge of how to cultivate it, instead of being diverted by the clamor for freedom to destroy it. Disillusioned middle age is apt to look upon the material side of the marriage relation, to see its solid surface in the cold, dull light of everyday experience, while youth, irradiated by the glow of its dreams, is unaware how its aerial and celestial fantasies are broken and shattered when unsuspectingly brought up against the hard facts of physical reality. The transmutation of material facts by celestial fantasies is to some extent within the power of humanity, even the imperfect humanity of today. When knowledge and love together go to the making of each marriage, the joy of that new unit, the pair, will reach from the physical foundations of its bodies to the heavens, where its head is crowned with stars. End of section 13.
Section 14 of Married Love. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ariel Lipshaw. Married Love by Marie Stopes. Section 14. Additions to the 6th edition. Addition 1, to page 49. A curious rigidity of mental and physical capacity seems to characterize some excellent and well-meaning people, and among those whose marriages unaccountably fail to reach just that height of perfection in a physical sense which they may intellectually desire, are those who are either entirely ignorant that sex union may be accomplished in many various positions, or those who consider any position but the most usual one to be wrong. Yet, curiously enough, it sometimes comes to light that a pair do not even know the usual position, and in my own experience several couples who have failed to have children, or have failed to obtain the complete delight of union, have revealed that the woman did not know that it is not only her arms which should embrace her lover. Consequently, entry was to him both difficult and sometimes impossible. In addition to this, the encouragement of that spontaneous movement which comes so naturally to those who are highly stirred, needs in far too many of our moderns to be cultivated. A pair should, impelled by the great wave of feeling within them, be as pliable as the sea plants moved by the rushing tides, and they should discover for themselves which of the innumerable possible positions of equilibrium results in the greatest mutual satisfaction. In this matter, as in so many others of the more intimate phases of sex life, there should not harden a routine, but the body should become at the service of intense feeling a keen and pliable instrument. Addition 2, to page 83. It must be remembered that the parallel of the more primitive creatures cannot be pressed too far, because in 1,000 ways we highly civilized human beings have developed in fresh directions away from our ancestral habits. This question, of whether or not it is right and wise to have sex unions during pregnancy, is one on which scientific research should be undertaken. Far too few men and women are clean-minded and frank enough to record their feelings in this connection, and far too few medical men delicately sympathetic enough to elicit the facts even from those women who are personally conscious of them. The little evidence which I have acquired through direct personal confidences about this subject points in absolutely conflicting so many others. The health, needs, and mental condition of women who are bearing children vary profoundly. From one distinguished medical specialist, I have acquired the interesting suggestion that in 1 or 2 cases among his own patients, where the prospective mother had desired unions, and the husband had denied them, thinking it in her interest, the doctor had observed that the children seemed to grow up restless, uncontrollable, and with an unduly marked tendency to self-abuse. On this most suggestive and important idea, I would gladly obtain evidence from parents and the medical profession, for only from a large number of cases can reliable conclusions be drawn. But just as in popular opinion, it is good for the child and the woman to gratify any harmless fancy for food which she may develop, so, in my opinion, it seems probable that any desire for moderate and careful sex union between the prospective mother and the father of the coming child should be gratified in the interests of all three. But this opinion is expressed merely provisionally, and largely in response to a number of inquirers who have asked me about this point. Immoderate and excessive sex union must undoubtedly be looked upon as an unfavorable symptom, and a practicing doctor should be consulted about it. A woman who is bearing a child by the man she deeply loves has an intense longing that he should share, so far as is possible, in influencing that child while it is coming, and that he should be as near and as close to it and to her as is possible. The basis of this longing you may well imagine may be not only a tender sentiment, the idea of which is so beautifully foreshadowed in Carpenter's Love's Coming of Age. A woman who is bearing a child should not, indeed she cannot, have the intensest form of muscular orgasm, but this subtler and deeper sweetening and harmonizing union has not only a romantic justification, but will, I think, be proved by science, when science becomes sensitive enough to handle such delicate things, to have a real biochemical basis. As so many people lack a de-visualizing imagination, perhaps I should add that the ordinary position of union is not suitable, indeed may be very well most harmful, to a woman during this time, but she and her husband can easily so intertwine themselves that the weight of both is lying upon the bed or upon pillows, and so no pressure falls upon the woman. Addition 3, to page 85. Although it is out of the province of this book to give advice about the more material and better known details of the general management of the health of the prospective mother, yet there are 1 or 2 very important points generally overlooked, which profoundly affect both the woman's health and happiness, and may affect also the child. For instance, leading medical experts are in the habit of considering the morning sickness, which is so usual in the early months of pregnancy, as a physiological process, and to look upon it complacently as perfectly normal and to be endured as a matter of course. This marks a deplorably low standard of health. Why should this comparatively small but nauseating experience accompany what should be among the most rapturously beautiful months of a woman's life? In my opinion, there is no reason for this at all, except that medical men have been blind leaders of the blind, accustomed always to deal with invalids or semi-invalids, they have lost the instinct to demand of humanity a high and buoyant state of health, while women, so harried by the undue drains of unregulated sex experience, with vitality so lowered by civilized life, have seen one another suffering on all sides until they too have lost the racial memory of radiant bodily beauty and health. Here and there an exceptional woman has gone through the months of pregnancy with no handicap, with not even morning sickness. Instead of looking upon her as an enviable exception, as all do now, look upon her as the normal standard which all should attain. One of the aids to attaining this standard for every prospective mother would be the knowledge by all adult women that, directly they know they are bearing a child, they should instantly discard not only all corsets, but all clothes of every kind which are heavy and close, or which have any definite bands or tight fastenings. Specialists are content to say no harm accrues if a woman wears comfortable corsets until the 3rd or 4th month. I denounce this as misleading folly. The sensitiveness to pressure, often unconscious at such a time, is extraordinary, and the penalty of even the lightest pressure is the morning sickness. The standard of clothing should be so light, so loose, that a butterfly could walk upon the bare skin beneath the clothes without breaking its wings. This may seem exaggerated to nearly everyone, but it is a very profound truth. Another aid to buoyant health during this time is to add to the diet the largest possible amount of uncooked fruit, particularly oranges, plums, and apples. Various books have been written on the health in pregnancy, though few of these are enlightened. Although one must deplore the many mistakes in elementary chemistry which are made therein, by far the best of the books on this subject known to me is Dr. Alice Stockham's Toxicology. In this book it is only such comparative trifles as the calling of carbonaceous material carbonates, which, though sufficient to prejudice the scientific mind against the rest of her work, does not really affect the profound truth of the gist of her message, a message which was first given to the public by a wise old Englishman long ago. Addition 4 to page 85. Owing partly to the incredible ignorance of our bodily structure, in which it is possible for a grown man or woman not only to enter marriage but to be married for years, sometimes apparently childless unions are not in any sense due to the incapacity of either partner for parenthood, but are due sometimes to trifling impediments which can easily be removed, or to trifling peculiarities of construction which can very simply be overcome. While the great majority of married couples are actually suffering, or would suffer without the exertion of definite control, from too many pregnancies, there are still, particularly in the middle and upper classes, many would-be parents who long for children but seem to be mysteriously deprived of them. Doctors may have examined both the man and the woman, and pronounced them perfectly normal, perfectly healthy, and perfectly capable of having children together, and yet children do not come. Sometimes this is caused by an undue activity of a slightly acid secretion on the part of the woman, a secretion doing her no harm, and of which she is quite unconscious, but which may be sufficient to render the active sperm impotent. Sometimes, therefore, it is sufficient to ensure conception for the woman to syringe the vagina with a little weak neutralizing solution such as sodium carbonate shortly before sex union. Another cause which sometimes operates against the vital sperm penetrating to the waiting ovum is an excess of mucus at the mouth of the womb. In such a case, it is important that a really complete and muscularly energetic orgasm should be achieved by the woman, not before but coincident with or after the sperm has been ejaculated. It is often argued that it makes no difference whether or not the woman has a complete orgasm, for so many cases are recorded in which women who have never experienced an orgasm have had many children, but it is generally forgotten that women are of many different types, and while one type of woman, the very fruitful mother with a wide vagina and but slight internal mucus, may conceive a dozen times without an orgasm, the more highly nervous, equally perfect woman may only conceive on the occasion when she experiences an orgasm whilst the sperm are actually in the vagina. Another slight obstacle to conception on the part of a woman, which is not infrequent, is the position of the mouth of the womb and the relation of the vaginal canal, which may be such that the spermatic fluid tends to be lost without any of it penetrating the orifice of the womb itself. To overcome this, it is often sufficient for the woman to turn over directly the act of union is complete and lie face downwards for a few hours. Without any question, all women have times of greater or less reproductive vitality, but in some women this is less marked than in others, and with some conception may take place at almost any date in the menstrual month, but with other women there is a group of days ranging from 3 or 4 to a dozen or more in which conception seems to be impossible, while on the other side of this group of neutral days, the days grade upwards towards a date of greater reproductive potency. Therefore, a woman and her husband who desire children, but have not after some years of marriage had the good fortune to attain parenthood, should choose for their acts of union those days on which conception is most likely. It is generally found that the most certain date for conception is, with very few exceptions, about the last day of the monthly period, or the day or two immediately after it, so that the husband who ardently desires his wife to conceive should, with her consent, concentrate their union so far as possible on such dates. On the other hand, it must not be forgotten that the effect on the whole nervous system of the desire to conceive is very great. A too frantic desire, which leads to too frequently repeated unions, will probably defeat itself, because it is not the mere coalescence of the sperm with the ovum which completes conception, it is also the attachment of that impregnated ovum to the wall of the womb, and intense nervous excitement may prevent that. Indeed, it has been stated by a medical man of considerable weight in the last century, that there are women among those races to whom sex knowledge is not taboo, who can voluntarily control conception at will, and consciously expel an impregnated ovum by mere exercise of nervous force. A woman in modern society, who is in a highly nervous condition, which may find expression in her constant need of cigarettes or excitement, may be, though this is by no means universally true, frequently impregnated, and at the same time continually throwing off the impregnated ovum before the settling down of that ovum, which results in true conception, can take place. If, therefore, the woman who urgently desires to be a mother finds herself continuously smoking, or notes in herself any other indication of a lack of placidity in her nerves, she would do well, not merely to restrict her smoking, which is nothing but a symptom of a deeper need, but she would do well to restore so far as possible a calm poise to her whole system by longer sleep, more country air, plenty of fresh butter, or whatever simple remedy it may be that will supply her nerves with something lacking, and for which she is unconsciously craving. Although to many it may seem incredible, yet it is not so rare as might be supposed that the adult pair may be married for years, and the wife still physically a virgin, owing to neither of the pair knowing that penetration must be effected. Amazing as it may seem, 4 or 5 such cases, all of intelligent, apparently average people, have come to my direct knowledge in the course of 1 year alone. Another cause, less extreme, is due to the woman making full entry difficult or impossible by not taking up a proper position during union. In such cases, a knowledge of the true details involved may speedily bring the desired conception. These very simple suggestions are of the kind often overlooked by the medical specialist, to whom a woman goes tremblingly asking if she is abnormally formed in any way, because she does not get the children she so much longs for. Such advice, of course, will apply only to people who are essentially normal and without deformity. For more serious obstructions to parenthood, the pair, and not the woman only, should seek medical advice. End of section 14. End of Married Love by Marie Stopes.